Everybody, welcome back to the channel. It's me, the Layman Apologist, and today I am going to be tackling a subject that I did not think I was going to be tackling for quite a while. Yes, that's right, I am tackling the dreaded topic of eschatology. Now, I wanted to put a little bit more time into this before I did a video on it. However, I had a mutual reach out, and I'll not name who it is, but I had a mutual reach out on X, and they basically wanted to know if I had any material on this topic. Now, I personally don't. My friend Gabe, who we host the live streams with, he does. He's some excellent articles in this, and I'm going to go and recommend Gabe go check him out at Trinity Apologetics. Now, we are tackling eschatology today. I'm going to do a video where I tackle four major branches, four major views of eschatology, and hopefully this is going to be a video that blesses people, benefits people. Now, please do note my goal here is not to provide some super thorough, in-depth, one resource to rule them all type video. It would be great if I could do that. That's not going to be possible because this is such a major field of study within theology, and people get really passionate over this subject. Like, obviously it makes sense, it's an incredibly important doctrine, but I have got today my laptop in front of me, my side monitor, and then I've got my tablet to the left of that. So if you see me looking around, folks, it's just because I've got my Bible open here and I've got my notes here to make sure that I hit my main points. And obviously I need to be looking here to try and keep eye contact with you guys. Please do forgive me if I can't maintain full eye contact because I am going to be looking around. I would love to have all this knowledge just, memorized off the top of my head, but unfortunately that I'm not quite there yet, and I don't think ever will be because the old memory's getting worse. But anyway, if you are a member on Fourth Wall, you will be seeing this video early. You will have early access to this video. If you're now watching this video on YouTube, it has been released after a later date, and if you would like to see more videos, early access, you can sign up to become a member at Fourth Wall and help support the channel. You'll get access to early videos like this, and you'll be able to also provide feedback and even vote on what future videos you would like to come up. So today, as I said, eschatology. So let's get in. So eschatology, it's a branch in theology. So obviously it comes from the breakdown of these words: eschatos, which means last, and logos, which means word, as we know from John, or it can also mean study. So then eschatology is the study of the last things. So the this basically the study of how the world will end, the study of Christ's return, of the general resurrection, of the resurrection of the righteous and the unjust, and also the study of how all these events unfold, and also the final judgment. So as you can tell, there's a lot packed into this word eschatology. And there are four major branches. We're going to look at those today and we're going to go through them. As I say, I've recorded this now a couple of times, so there's parts where I maybe feel I'm repeating myself, but I just realized you guys haven't actually seen that yet. So for me, I'm not repeating, or no, for me, I am repeating. For you, I'm not repeating myself yet. So if I ever make an assumption at some stage in this recording, please do forgive me. It's probably because I thought I've already said it and I hadn't. So we are today tackling this subject. This subject scares a lot of people. A lot of Christians don't want to touch eschatology. R.C. Sproul, for years before he came to the position that I hold to, called himself a pan-millennialist. Basically, it'll all pan out in the end. I don't know how it's going to unfold, but I trust Christ and it'll all pan out in the end. Now, he joked about that, but he later on in his life came to hold an actual position, and he would say, and I would say to you as well, if you are jokingly a pan-millennialist, where you would basically, and that's a tongue twister, um, try and move beyond that. Don't let this subject intimidate you. Theology is for everyone, and do not get scared of this topic. Yes, it's a very big topic, it's a very deep topic, but it really, really does. Your view of the end times affects how you suffer. It affects how you pray, how you endure trials, even how you order your life in light of Christ's rule, how you look towards the future or don't, because some positions really do. And I'm not going to get into it just yet, but some positions are basically just waiting to be rescued and taken up to heaven, and the earth's going to hell in a handbasket. Forgive the language, but that's pretty much a certain view. I believe that eschatology is more of a hopeful position, but we'll get to that. So in this video, we're going to explain the four major eschatological views that are held by all faithful Christians. Note what I said, folks. Faithful Christians. So whether you're premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial, or partial preterist, these are the four that we're tackling today. And folks, I am going to try and be as unbiased as possible. One of these positions I do hold to. I hope I give it the same fair treatment that I give it the other three positions. However, if you hold to one of the other three positions and you think I didn't do a great job, or maybe you think I did all right, but you want to give a bit more detail, please do comment. I would love to have you up on the channel for a discussion. I would love to have you come on and defend your position. Now, the reason why each of these perspectives attempts to make sense of the Bible's teaching of Christ's return, the unfolding of redemptive history. Now, we would not hold these positions. I wouldn't hold my position if I didn't think it makes sense of the biblical data, the historical data, and the views of some other theologians. You would not hold your position if you didn't feel the same way. Now, all of the groups that are involved here, I believe, are not just speculating. I believe that they believe, that's a lot of believing, but I believe that they believe in their position being the best position, the strongest position, and the position that makes most sense. Otherwise, they wouldn't hold those beliefs. So I commend them for that. So this is not a battle. This is an in-house debate amongst brothers and sisters. We can agree to disagree. Now, before we dive into each of these views, so again, I've got my scripture over here. I've got my notes here to make sure I don't go too far off topic because I ramble a lot. Please do forgive me. We need to address the fact that all four of these groups, before we get into the differences we actually have a lot in common, and these are core distinctives that all Orthodox Christians agree on. So all faithful Christians, regardless of their position on the millennium, or the timing of how prophetic events shape up or come to completion, we all agree on certain core convictions that are non-negotiable. Now, one of these is the fact that Christ will return bodily and visibly. We see this taught in Acts 1:1, where we see the angels tell the disciples that the same Jesus who was taken into heaven visibly and bodily will return in the same way, or like it says in the Greek, will return in the same manner, that is, visibly and bodily. So we all affirm that. Christians within these groups also affirm the general resurrection of the dead. So Jesus himself in John 5:28-29 says this, that a time is coming when all who are in their graves will hear his voice and come out. All who are in the graves. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment. So that's another position on which we all agree on. We also all teach that there will be a final judgment, as Revelation chapter 20, 11-15 clearly shows. The dead, great and small, will stand before the throne of God. Books will be opened, including the book of life. Those whose names are not found in the book of life will be cast into the lake of fire, and all Christians affirm that this world, in its current fallen state, will be renewed. So that's another position we agree on. In Revelation 21, it describes the new heavens and the new earth where God will dwell with his people, and there will be no more death, there'll be no more pain, no more suffering, no more crying, and hallelujah to that. So there's another position that we all agree on. Finally, all Christians in these camps agree that Christ's kingdom will never come to an end. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 to 14, Daniel prophesies this, and it says, one like a son of man will come on the clouds and will be given dominion, glory, and a kingdom that will never pass away. So, this is a position that we all agree on. These are core truths that all these groups that hold to different distinctives. Forgive me a second, folks. I just need to plug in my charger just to make sure we don't run out of juice. This is something we all agree on. This is something that we share. So these are shared beliefs that form the foundation of Christian eschatology, where we all agree on. Now, disagreements will emerge, and we'll see this as we start to look at some of the actual positions whenever it comes to interpreting the prophetic and the apocalyptic texts. Particularly when we get into passages like Matthew 24, 1 Thessalonians 4 to 5, and Revelation chapter 20. So, with that common ground established, we're now going to turn to our first major view, and that's premillennialism. So, again, folks, I'll let you know when we come to my position. This is not it yet. So, if you're a premillennial guy or gal, but if you're a premillennial guy, especially, and you want to come up and you want to talk about this position and say, hey, Layman, you did a decent job, but you didn't quite explain it good enough. Let me try. Or, Layman, you did an awful job. Let me come up and I'll tell you how it really is. So, this began premillennialism. Premillennialism, then, is the view that Christ will return before a future literal 1,000-year reign on earth. So, let me just add in before we go any further. The reason why a lot of these positions all have millennial in the title is whenever we get to the book of Revelation and it talks about this period of Christ's reign, talks about the 1,000-year reign. So most of these positions then are talking about this 1,000-year, hence why you've got premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial. So we'll get to that. Now, premillennialism, just going to repeat this because I interrupted. Premillennialism is the view that Christ will return before a future literal 1,000-year reign on earth. So this term then comes to us from the Latin pre, meaning before, millennium, meaning 1,000 years, so before the 1,000 years. So this position then holds that the second coming of Christ will precede a golden age of peace, righteousness, and justice on earth, during which Jesus will rule visibly and bodily. So, listen to that once again. This position holds that the second coming of Christ will precede a golden age of peace, righteousness, justice on earth, during which Jesus will rule visibly and bodily. So Jesus is going to come back, and then there's going to be this golden age of peace, righteousness, and justice on earth for 1,000 years. Now, there are two main types of premillennialism. You have got historic premill and you've got dispensational premill. So the historic premill position is the older of the two and was held by a lot of early church fathers, including Papias, Justin Martyr, guys like Irenaeus. And these early Christians believed that following a period of tribulation and a period of suffering for the church, that Christ would return, he would raise the righteous dead, and he would establish a literal kingdom. It's a kingdom that would be on earth, ruled from Jerusalem, and it would last for 1,000 years. So this kingdom would be marked by peace, be marked by righteousness, but would still exist in a fallen world. Now that's important. Only after this millennial reign would the final judgment and the new heavens and the new earth be ushered in. Now, dispensational premillennialism, on the other hand, developed in the 19th century and through primarily through the teachings of a guy called John Nelson Darby. And his teachings kind of became popularized and spread throughout mainly America through C.I. Scofield and C.I. Scofield's Reference Bible. Wow, that's a mouthful. So this view of it is marked by a sharp distinction between Israel and the church, and it introduces a concept called the rapture. Now, this is an event in which believers are taken up um, into heaven before a 7 year period of great tribulation on the earth. Now, after this tribulation, so after this period of 7 years where there's tribulation happening on the earth, Christ returns with his saints to defeat the Antichrist, establish his millennial kingdom, so that kingdom, and fulfill the promises made to national Israel. So this system then, pre-mill dispensationalism, um, this system divides history into dispensations or periods in which God deals with humanity in different ways. So the key biblical text then for premillennialism is Revelation 20, verses 1 to 6. And this is the passage that speaks of Satan being bound for 1,000 years and of the saints reigning with Christ during that time. Now, premill guys and gals tend to take this passage literally, um, which is not a bad thing, by the way. Just want to point that out. So they tend to take this passage literally. Other important passages that they'll appeal to is obviously, like we've already said, First Thessalonians 4:16 to 17, which describes believers being caught up to meet the Lord. They will talk about Daniel 9:24 to 27, which they use to construct what they call a tribulation timeline. Now, what I would say there is, I think that timeline is iffy, but we'll talk about that later on. Let's actually talk about a strength of premillennialism, or at least a couple. So here's a couple of strengths of it. It's got a real strong, and this is what I love about my premill brothers and sisters. They've got a real strong emphasis on a future bodily reign of Christ, and they present a very compelling vision of justice and restoration in which evil, the devil, is visibly defeated, righteousness is enforced, and it also takes the apocalyptic imagery of Revelation at face value. Say what you want about it, whether you agree or disagree, the fact that they take it at face value, I think, can be said that it's a strength. Could it also be a weakness? Absolutely. And from my position, I would say yes, but let me just say that it is a strength. Now, speaking of weaknesses, I would often say, or sorry, not I would often say, this is something that is often lobbied against my pre-mill brothers and sisters, is that their system involves a complex prophetic timeline that can lead to confusion or date setting. Now, dispensationalism in particular has been criticized for goodness knows since it's been around now for it's been criticized for reading current events into the Bible, and we call this newspaper eschatology, basically. That's a criticism that we would offer towards it. We would say that they tend to look for current events and go, look, Bible prophecy is being fulfilled. And another weakness is the fact that they divide God's redemptive plan between Israel and the church in a way that some, I would say the majority, argues lacks biblical support. You're splitting the people of God into two as if God has two people. Now, remember, I'm talking primarily here about dispensational premills, so that's not my premill brothers and sisters that are historic premill. Um, Also, many theologians would also argue that Revelation 20 should be read symbolically, not literally. So, while I said initially that one of their strengths was that they would read it at face value, and again, I think that's good. They're seeking to take God at His word, but what matters is the fact that we have to take in literary, uh, sorry, my mind is blanking on me here. We have to take into account literary style. Is something poetic? Is something historical? Is something apocalyptic? That matters for interpretation. Now, premillennialism remains one of the most popular views, especially among evangelicals in particular. So, it holds out the hope that Christ will return in glory to reign visibly on earth before the final consummation of all things. So, for that, I say, praise the Lord. So, again, not trying to be super in depth. If I didn't represent your position in the best light, please know that was not my intention. I am just trying to give more of a general overview. And if you ever do want to come up, please do comment down below, and I would be happy to bring you up at some time. Now, we're going to move into postmillennialism. So, postmillennialism teaches then that Christ returns after the millennium. So, obviously, you had Christ coming before the 1,000-year reign. Postmillennialism, you have Christ returning after the millennium reign. Now, here's an important distinction to note here. Within postmillennialism, the millennium itself is not necessarily literally a 1,000-year period. It could be, but it may not be literally, and we have reasons. I think I kind of showed my hand there. I said we. I would be post-mill, but I also do follow into another camp that is also joined with this. So I think I've already showed my hand here, but that's fine. So we would say in this position that it's not necessarily literally a 1,000-year reign. Bear with me a second, folks. Yes, so this is rather actually how we would view this is a long era of gospel growth and global Christian influence. The central idea here in postmillennialism is the fact that God is expanding his kingdom in the present age, and that the gospel will eventually be so successful that it transforms not only individuals' lives, but will actually transform entire societies and cultures. Now, according to Postmills, we are not heading towards greater chaos and apostasy, but towards an era in which nations are discipled, justice will prevail, and the knowledge of the Lord will cover the face of the earth, just as the waters covers the sea. Now, this millennial age is inaugurated by Christ's first coming and continues on as the church proclaims the gospel. Christ is ruling right now, and he rules from heaven, and by the power of the Spirit, he is subduing his enemies and putting them under his feet. Once this period of blessing and gospel victory reaches its fullness, Christ will return, the dead will be raised, and the final judgment will take place. So, some of the key texts for postmillennialism include Matthew 28:18-20, which is the Great Commission. Um, this is something that is empowered by Christ's present authority, in which he says, I have all rule in heaven and earth. We also look at Psalm 2. We would look at Psalm 110, both of which depict the Messiah reigning until all his enemies are subdued under his feet. First Corinthians, let's just Yep. First Corinthians 15:24-25 says that Christ must reign until he's put all his enemies under his feet, and that includes death. So death is the last enemy to be defeated. Now, one of the strengths of this view, and again I'm going to try and remain neutral here, is the optimistic view of history. It encourages cultural engagement, long-term thinking, investment in institutions like education, law, family, especially. So I don't have to sit here and worry. For example, like I don't have to sit here and think, oh, well, I don't really need to worry about what my grandkids are going to do, because we could be taken in glory by that stage. In this view of postmillennialism, we would view that the church could be around for many, many, many hundreds, maybe even thousands of more years yet. Now, that would be a position that some people would think is a weakness of our position, and I will come to that. So let me see here. Where am I on my notes? Yes, we would see Christ's kingdom not merely as a spiritual kingdom, but we would see it as something that affects every area of life. The gospel, then, in this view, has a tangible and truly transformative power, and it touches every area of life, like I said. Now, some of the challenges that this view has is people would say that it seems to ignore or minimizes warnings about widespread apostasy. It seems to ignore things like persecution and tribulation. Another criticism that we would often get is things like people would point to, say, for example, historical events. They would appeal to things like wars and genocides, and how the world seems to become an ever increasingly secular, despite what I just said a moment ago about we view that it's going to completely transform and overcome society. Now, note how I'm using the term appear, so that may be part of my bias. I do apologize, but again, I would not hold my position if I didn't think that it was true. But what we would say to that is postmillennialists would argue that these setbacks are temporary and they are part of a long arc towards victory. Now, we are finite creatures, we are modern creatures, and we can only really tend to think at times in the timeline of which we have been alive. So, for example, I could look back to when I was born in the 90s, and I could say, oh, I remember, Sundays used to be a day where even non Christians seemed to recognize that there was something special about Sunday. Shops weren't open, off licenses weren't open. If you're American, that's a liquor store. Um, and nowadays, I can look at it and go, Sunday just seems to be like another day of the week. Like, is that not somehow a defeater for my system? Well, again, this is what we would appeal to. We would say if you look at it in such a short term of event, yes, that would look bad. But if we look at history in chunks of 500 years, I would say that the view of history from the time of the very early church to where we are now, things have only got progressively better. So that would be an answer we would provide to that. Now, postmillennialism then has been held by theologians like Jonathan Edwards, Charles Hodge, Kenneth Gentry, who's obviously more of a modern scholar but great guy, and obviously everybody's favorite internet pastor. Whether you love him or hate him, that's a different story. Douglas Wilson, he is another proponent of it. So, postmillennialism then paints what I would say is a compelling picture of a victorious church, a victorious gospel, and a triumphant Christ whose kingdom truly advances in history before he returns. Now, amillennialism. These guys will be a lot closer to post mill, but we'll go through this bit at a time. So, amillennialism or amill is the view that there is no future literal 1,000 year reign of Christ on earth following his return. So the term amillennial literally means no millennium. But this is something that's a bit of a misnomer, really, because amills do believe in a millennial reign of Christ, but they understand it as being symbolic rather than literal. Um, and they also view it as being a present reality rather than a future era. So similar to post mills, Amil guys would view this that Christ is currently reigning right now. Um, but not in the way the post mill guys would say, if that makes sense. I hope I've explained that. So, in this view, then, you have got the millennium described in Revelation 20 not as a period of earthly or political rule, but rather it's a symbolic reference to the present reign of Christ from heaven. So, Christ, in this position, Christ is currently reigning over his kingdom after he has been exalted at his resurrection and ascension. The binding of Satan, interestingly enough, in Revelation 20 here is understood as the limitation of Satan's ability to deceive the nations. Now, in post mill, we would also say that as well. So, Satan's no longer able to deceive the nations the way he once was, and that began at Christ's first coming. They would appeal to passages where the disciples returned back, and Jesus said, "I saw Satan as if cast from heaven like lightning." I'm paraphrasing. They would view the verse. So Amil guys would view the first resurrection in the passage that refers to souls of believers reigning with Christ in heaven after death. The second resurrection, they would believe then, is the bodily resurrection at the end of the age. So let me just say that one more time. The first resurrection refers to souls of believers reigning with Christ in heaven after death. The second resurrection is the bodily resurrection at the end of the age. Now, the kingdom of God, according to Amil guys and gals, grows not through a physical golden age the way it would in the post-mill view, but they view it through a quiet, steady advance of the gospel and the sanctification of the church. The church age then is the millennium. That's what they would view. They would say that this is the age of the church. And at the end of this age, Christ will return in glory. The dead will be raised, the final judgment will take place, and the new heavens and the new earth will be ushered in. So let's look at some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses. Now, one of the theological strengths of this position is the now but the not yet tension that we sometimes see in scripture, and sometimes believers wrestle over and don't quite know how to handle it. I would say one of the strengths of the Amil position is that they've got a really good already but not yet going on. So Christ's kingdom is already inaugurated. That me and that word today, inaugurated, but not yet consummated. So believers live in the overlap of ages, experiencing, you know, both the present sufferings of this fallen world, but also the spiritual blessings of the union with Christ and the age to come. That age where we rule and reign with Christ. So Amil then has strong roots in the Augustinian tradition. So Augustine himself, who shifted from a premillennial view um, to the amillennial, or what is now known as the Amil view. And Augustine's interpretation pretty much became the dominant view throughout the medieval church and even in much of the Reformed tradition. That's why you'll find a lot of Reformed folk in particular will be Amil. Now, notable adherents of this position, so you would have guys like Martin Luther, you would have John Calvin, Louis Berkhoff, some modern ones. You've got Kim, how do you pronounce his second name? Kim Riddle Barger. Apologies, and Michael Horton. Now, one of the things, so some of the key scriptural points that they would point to is, let's see, they would point to John 18:36, where they would say Jesus says his kingdom is not of this world. They would appeal to Luke 17:20-21, where Jesus says the kingdom is already among them. And 1 Corinthians 15, which teaches, again, they would appeal to the passage that post-mill guys love, which teaches that the end comes when Christ delivers the kingdom to the Father. Now, what I would say here is Amil is deeply pastoral at its heart. It avoids speculation, it avoids timelines, it avoids date setting, but it really does emphasize readiness. Be ready. It emphasizes perseverance. It encourages believers to be faithful in the present while longing for the future of Christ's return. It affirms the centrality of Christ's reign, and calls the church to live under true discipleship and lordship even as they groan for the day of resurrection. So that's a strength of it. Now, I'm just realizing in my notes here, for some reason, and the Amil guys are going to love this, I forgot to include weaknesses. So what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to try and give weaknesses off the top of my head. So Amil guys, you technically have won this. through me being a dum dum and forgetting things, but it does. Your victory is not real. I'm just letting you have a mini victory. So take your W and ah, can't believe I did that. Anyway, partial preterism. Now, here's where I need to make myself clear. I am a post-mill guy who is a partial preterist. Now, partial preterism then is the view that most or many of the prophecies in the New Testament, especially those concerning the things like tribulation, judgment, the coming of Christ, were actually fulfilled in the first century. They were primarily fulfilled in the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Now, I don't want to point too far behind me because the last time I did this in stream, I nearly knocked the bookcase down on top of my head. But if you look up here, we have a book here called Josephus. You probably can't see it great in this light, but this book here, The Jewish War by the historian Josephus, he records a lot of what took place in 70 AD. And whenever you line it up with the book of Revelation, I believe that it makes an awful lot of sense. Now, I'm not here to sell you on it. I'm just here to tell you this is my view. So the term preterism comes from the Latin word praeter, meaning past. So partial preterists then believe, as I said, much of what is traditionally what other eschatological views view as future. The majority of partial preterists, even post-mill guys, and you will normally find that it is post-mill guys that are partial preterists. There may be exceptions, obviously, but we believe that much of it that traditionally was considered, future prophecy, we actually see as being fulfilled. Now, I want to make it clear, as partial preterists, we still affirm a future bodily return of Christ, the final resurrection, and the last judgment. There's a reason why we're called partial preterists, not full preterists. I'm not a full preterist. I believe full preterists are heterodox. They often get called heretical. I would lean more to heterodox, and if you don't know what heterodox means, it's the opposite of orthodox. So just basically wrong. So this view then hinges heavily on time indicators that are found within the New Testament. So, for instance, most positions would view Matthew 24 as a future event. However, partial preterists would see that Jesus was saying truly, and this is Matthew 24, verse 34. There's multiple time indicators I could pull out here, but Matthew 24:34, Jesus says this: truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Now, partial preterists take this at face value and argue that Jesus was speaking of the events leading up to and including the destruction of the temple. Likewise, we also interpret the beast of Revelation as referring to Nero Caesar, or technically Caesar, because there's no soft C in Latin, so Nero Caesar. And we would view the Great Tribulation as referring to the horrors of the Jewish Roman War. Hence this book, The Jewish War. Now, forgive me, folks, because I feel like I'm going to sneeze. Ooh. Partial preterism emphasizes then that um, many of these events that took place in the first century and uh, were relative to the believers in the day that it was written to. It had direct reference and relevance to their life. So when John writes to the seven churches in the book of Revelation, he is writing to believers who this would have had a direct impact on. Because if the book of Revelation had no meaning, no historical event to these people, then the book doesn't make much sense. So we have that. So we also view the fall of Jerusalem as the climactic covenantal judgment at the end of the old covenant age. The old covenant was coming to an end, it was passing away. And it was actually this, we see this as the vindication of Christ's new covenant and the new covenant authority. So I once again want to point out partial preterists are not full preterists. Full preterists deny a future bodily return of Christ or a final resurrection. And that position would be considered by many Orthodox Christians as heretical. I would say heterodox. And I would lean towards it I think in certain areas it can stray into being heretical, but for now I'll say it's heterodox. Now, we would appeal to biblical support for this view, including Matthew 24 and 25. We would look to the book of Revelation. We would look to the numerous places, even within the book of Revelation, where it says soon, at hand, about to be. Um, we even go into the book of James, chapter 5, verses 8 and 9. We would appeal to passages like Hebrews uh, chapter 10, 25 to 27. Double check that for me, folks. I should be checking, but I don't want to make this video an hour long, which it looks like it's going that direction. We would also cite Jesus' prediction in Luke 21, verse 20 to 22, in which he describes Jerusalem surrounded by armies and a time of vengeance fulfilling all that is written. So Luke, being the Gentile author, explains what the abomination of desolation is. And note what Luke says. It's when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies. So again, that's something we would appeal to. Now, the strength of this view is its historical grounding. Like, we appeal to, like, we can see in history that these events took place. I would say it helps today modern readers recognize the immediate context of Jesus' words and the very real expectations of Jesus' actual disciples. I would say it clears up confusions. Let me just, yeah. So it clears up confusions around phrases like this generation. It removes the necessity for future elaborate timelines where there's a gap here and, years between this part and that part. It's just date setting and timelines is messy and it's unnecessary. But I would also say that this view emphasizes the present reign of Christ, and it works really well with postmillennialism, which is why postmill guys are often, if not nearly always, partial preterists. So this view, as I say, emphasizes the present reign of Christ and the unfolding of his kingdom in history. Now, thankfully, looking at my notes, I did put in some critiques here, so Amil guys really did get away with it. But that's my fault, and plus I love my Amil brothers and sisters, so critics will often argue that preterism can downplay and spiritualize future hope and cosmic renewal. So most preterists affirm a future bodily return of Christ, but our emphasis is mainly on things that are in the past. We would say this has happened, it's already fulfilled. And in sometimes, I would agree with this criticism. I would say that sometimes partial preterists can get so caught up on what has happened that there is almost a lack of looking forward, and we can get so caught up in over realized eschatology. I would also say it raises interpretive questions about Revelation's dating and genre. Now, let me just add an author's note. I know this is a video, but technically it's still considered an author's note. I believe Revelation is primarily apocalyptic literature. I believe that whenever you understand the symbols that John uses throughout the book, you look through the Old Testament, you see John uses an awful lot of Jewish symbology. And whenever you understand what those symbols meant in the Old Testament, I believe you get a better understanding of what John is saying in the book of Revelation. And as I say, I believe it's apocalyptic literature. It's judgment. Now, some prominent defenders of this view is, like I've already mentioned, R.C. Sproul. R.C. Sproul came to this position. There's Gary DeMar, Kenneth Gentry, like I've already said, and this view has gained an awful lot of popularity within reform circles. Um, um, People might think this is a bit more of a criticism, but I think it's a strength. I would say partial preterists are often more very sober, history conscious, and almost covenantally driven approach to prophecy. Um, and that's not to like rub salt in the other views wounds, so to speak, and say, oh, you're not serious or whatever. But It's just a strength I'm pointing out. Now, partial preterism then also challenges us to consider how deeply rooted the New Testament is in the first century context, but it still calls for us to live with expectancy for Christ's future triumphant return. So there is a strength there. We are meant to look towards the future. One of the weaknesses is sometimes we do get a little bit stuck in the past, what has already happened. So, as we have seen, the study of eschatology then is not something that it is intimidating. I'm not going to lie. It's I remember when I first got into it, I didn't know where to begin, and if I knew what the term I'm struggling today, folks. If I knew what the term pan-millennialist was at the time, I would have called myself on. However, knowing what you believe about eschatology is important. It is vital. And your view of eschatology really does drive how you live your life, how you worship. So, while we've got four major views here, we've got Premill, which we covered both historic and dispensational. And again, I know I didn't go super in depth. That's not the point of the video. We covered Postmill, we covered Amill, and we covered partial preterism. Now, they all differ from each other in their interpretation of prophetic scripture, but they all share a profound hope in the return of Jesus Christ. So, no matter what you come to at the end of this video, no matter what you come to at the end of your studies, know that if you hold to one of these four camps, you do hold to orthodox teaching. Now, the dispensational part, I have dispensational friends. I'm going to be honest, Tim and I are going to have a talk about this sometime in the future, which is great. I look forward to it. But the dispensationalism, the modern dispensationalism that is very prevalent today, I am not a fan of. I'm just going to be perfectly honest. I don't like it. I think it's ahistorical. I think it does damage to a lot of the parts, a lot of precious parts of scripture. Um, so that's my author's note. But what I would say is, even that at its core, we all share the profound hope of Jesus' return, the resurrection of the dead, the final establishment of God's everlasting kingdom. And that's what we should primarily focus on. So each of these perspectives do have their own strengths, their own challenges and weaknesses, even though I apparently forgot to include the A-mills. Sorry, guys, although I'm fairly sure you guys will not be complaining. So while some may emphasize future visible reign of Christ on earth, and others focus on it being more of a spiritual reign of Christ in the church, and then others view it more as from the partial preterism position, will even highlight things like the fulfillment of prophecy that already took place in the first century. But we all hold fast to the future consummation of God's kingdom, of Christ returning, of us ruling and reigning with him. And what unites all of us Orthodox Christians is a trust in the sovereignty of God over history. So we long for the day, and I mean long for the day, when God will wipe away every tear from our eyes, where righteousness will reign forever, where we no longer have pain, we no longer have suffering, and even better, we no longer have in-house debates. We will all know who was right, who was wrong, and who knows, some of us might be in for a huge shock. But I just want you to know, guys, understanding these views then will help you navigate the complexities of Scripture and the trials that come in life with greater. You'll have either greater clarity or confidence if you come to a position in which you view and what you think does the best justice to the explanation of the text, the best reckoning of what history says, and which guys in history held your position. Because you'll look at it and say, look, this is not on its own, this shouldn't be anything worthwhile, but look at these heavy hitters that believe this. I know I'm in good company. So, let us live faithfully. Let us live with a steadfast hope, being diligent to obey the Lord, to walk in obedience, and to be watchful for Christ's return. So, ultimately, no matter which eschatological position you hold to, the gospel remains the center of our hope. Christ has already won the decisive victory over sin, death, and Satan. Christ now invites us to follow him now with the blessed assurance and promise that he will come again to make all things new. So, as you and I look forward to that glorious day, let us fix our eyes upon Christ. Let us fix our eyes upon Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, and let us live in joyful anticipation of his kingdom forevermore. So, folks, that's it. We're almost at an hour. I figured we were going to hit an hour, so that's good. Um, I know I didn't go super in depth. There's many, many things I could have said. There's so many points I could have hit on, but I would have been here for hours, literally, because I'm someone A that can talk, and B, I ramble, which is what I mean by talk. But ultimately, this is such a huge position, me trying to condense these views and put it down into one video. I hope it's a good starting resource for people. That's all it's going to be, because this is a starting resource. This is not attempting to be the be all and the end all or the ultimate, as I say, the source to rule all sources on eschatology. I'm not going to solve this problem. There's smarter men in history than I that have attempted to explain eschatology, and still people come away with different systems of eschatology. So, like I said, eyes on Jesus, focus on the things that matter. Can we in-house debate eschatology? Yes. But guys, let's try and pull the temperature down a little bit. We don't have to attack faithful brothers and sisters because they hold to a slightly different version of eschatology. Now, with all that said, thank you very, very much for watching. I am going to be uploading this video, so if you're already watching this, you're an early access member, you're someone that's got access to these videos early. If you're currently watching this on YouTube, know that you're watching it a lot later. I will put most of my videos will always be free. I will definitely do some videos that will be on members only because it's a way to help support me, support the channel, because this type of stuff, folks, believe it or not, like I think sometimes from your end, I know when I watch certain YouTubers, it looks like they're just sitting in front of a camera and talking and rambling, but a lot of time goes into the setup, to the lighting, preparing out your notes, your studying, your prayer. It does take an awful lot of time. I love doing what I do. I really do hope that it blesses people. I am so thankful for the many people that have already supported me, that pray for me, that buy merch, that donate to buy me a coffee. You guys really do help encourage me. You help make this something that I wish to give my life to, something that I wish to be a benefit to the church. And I hope I honor the Lord in this role. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, folks. I'm going to go ahead now and close out the video. So I'm just going to say the usual things. If you would like to discuss this a little bit better, if you're someone that holds to one of those positions and you think, hey, Layman, you did an awful job, let me come up and school you, please do come up and we'll talk about these positions. I look forward to healthy debate and healthy conversation. But yes, hopefully this video helped you. Hopefully it's a good resource, a good starting point. And if you are a member, as I say, you've got early access. If you're not and you're watching this on YouTube later, please do consider becoming a member. You'll get access to these early videos and get to help support, like I said. But ultimately, what I want you all to go away with from this is to focus on the core distinctives, because that's what matters. Thank you very much for watching, folks. Please do like, comment, and subscribe. All those actions are free on YouTube, but it really, really does help the channel grow. I don't think people realize just how much it does, because YouTube push you into the algorithm if you are a channel where your audience is active. So if that's how you choose to support me, that is the best way you can. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. So guys, thank you very much for watching. God bless.